So I think I'll go ahead and begin. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today for Lindsay McIntyre's virtual Open Studio event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, and we are very honored and grateful to undertake our work here. My name is Jazz Keeler, and I'm the Interim Public Programs and Residency Coordinator here at Griffin. And just quickly before we begin, I wanted to mention just a few things for those of you who may be new to Zoom. So your video and microphone, as you probably noticed, have been muted upon entry into this digital space. So we do just ask that if your microphone is not muted, that you mute it and keep it muted for the duration of the talk. It just helps reduce some of the background noise. And as for your video, it's totally up to you if you'd like to keep it turned off or turn it on. I would like to mention that Griffin will be live streaming this virtual event on our Facebook page as well. I'd also like to mention that we do recommend that you have your view set to presenter view. So if my video is large and centered on your screen right now, you're good to go. But if you're seeing a whole bunch of little grids right now, we do recommend that you just go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and toggle from grid view to presenter view. I'd also like to mention before we begin that if you have any questions at all for Lindsay throughout her talk, please do go ahead at any time throughout the presentation and just type in your questions in the chat box. And you could type that in for everyone to see, or you could direct it directly to Lindsay. So it's a big honor to introduce our guest presenter today, Lindsay McIntyre. Lindsay is a filmmaker and artist of Inuit and settler Scottish descent with an MFA in film production from Concordia and a BFA in painting and drawing from the University of Alberta, who generally prefers to do things the hard way. She applies her interest in film chemistry, analog film, and structure to make award-winning short films, expanded 16mm cinema performances, and other things. Interested simultaneously in the apparatus of cinema, portraiture, representation, and personal histories, she bridges gaps in collective experience and remains dedicated to integrating theory, practice, form, and content. She has made 35 short films that have screened around the world and is embarking on her first feature. Internationally, she has contributed a body of knowledge to the practice of silver gelatin emulsion making and coating for motion picture film and teaches this and other celluloid-based practices around the world. She was honored with the REVEAL Indigenous Art Award from the Hnatyshyn Foundation in 2017 and was named the Victor Martyn Lynch-Staunton Award recipient for Excellence in Media Arts by the Canada Council for the Arts in 2013. She has been Assistant Professor of Film and Screen Arts at Carr University of Art and Design on the unceded Coast Salish territories since 2017. And Lindsay is Griffin's second North Shore Studio Art Residency Award recipient, selected from an open call that invites applications from artists living in the districts of North and West Vancouver and the city of North Vancouver. So thank you so much, Lindsay, for being with us here today, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. This is really wonderful to see so many people here. Also really nerve-wracking. This is really quite strange. I've never done an artist talk via an online platform before, so this is going to be a little bit of chaos, which is pretty standard for me, that there's a little bit of chaos involved in everything that I do. I'll be switching between screen sharing and showing you around the studio. I'm presently in the Griffin Art Project's studio space, which I've been sharing for the last 6 weeks with Taryn Shepherd, who also was the Emily Carr Artist in Residence for this past 6 weeks. And it's been a really wonderful time and a bit I don't know, maybe scattered. I've been working on 3 or 4 different projects at the same time. So I'm going to try and give you a little bit of a context of me as an artist a little bit first, And then, because I know lots of you, but there's a few of you that I don't know. And then I'm going to go through some examples of some of the things that I've been working on. And I just realized yesterday, well, it was at 5:30 in the morning this morning while I was still working on these projects, that I haven't shown work in progress for about a decade, maybe longer. So this is a bit vulnerable for me to show work in progress. But hopefully it's an interesting thing for you guys. I'm going to switch to screen share. Hopefully this works. Bear with me. Screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again later. Okay. Let's try that now then. Okay, how about now? Can you guys see the screen? It should be black with a white line on it.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you. I need to go all the way back though, so you guys are gonna see all this cool stuff. Let's see. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, just start with, can you guys still see the screen?
No.
No. What happened? Share screen, share. Okay, that looks right?
Good to go.
Okay, thank you. There might be a little bit of this because I'm not used to performance Zoom yet. I'm gonna have to get used to it though, teaching this term. But for now, you guys are my test subjects. So I started this residency, I believe it was something like July 15th. And I proposed to work on 3 different projects throughout this residency, one of which was a bit of an archival project about my late uncle Kiwiak, who you're going to get to know a little bit through this talk, as well as an examination or an exploration of a lot of the things that are sort of left over from my own life. So I was looking through all of these things from Kiwiak's life, who was a considerably more important person than I am. And then I started looking at some of the things that are left over from my own trajectory so far, and was interested in the ways in which I might treat those things differently when working with my own material versus working with this material about my uncle Kiwiak. And then the third project is something that it's underway. It's a short film that's also animated. All of these are animations, actually. It's an animated film that I'm making for it's called Inuit. It's the inaugural exhibition at the brand new Inuit Art Center in Winnipeg from the Winnipeg Art Gallery. So that exhibition is slated to happen sometime in late 2020, early 2021, potentially. And so I'm putting together a film, which is a bit of a complex process that involves audio performers in Nunavut or in other locations, and trying to sort of direct things by distance because of COVID. So there's some extra components of this that aren't yet in place. You won't be able to hear any of that audio yet, but you'll be able to see what some of the images look like. So just a really quick introduction. I started making films in about 1999, and I started as an artist picking up film off the street, literally, and trying to make something with it. So I like to work with my hands. And I always say that film is basically my material practice. So it's really important for me to have physical objects in my hands when I'm working. I do work digitally sometimes, but for me, it's a very different process. Film and video are not 2 versions of the same thing. They're not like you could choose video or you could choose film as an acquisition format. For me, film is a very material thing, and it's pretty important that it be in my hands. And so when I started making films, I started trying to figure out what kinds of things I could do with this very cool material object. It's transparent. it's light moving in time. You can physically hold it up to the light, you can see through it. And I really enjoyed drawing and scratching on the film. This is something that I just took up on my own. I had not yet at that point learned anything about the very long history of experimental filmmakers who've worked in this tradition. So one of the things that I did was I tried to figure out how to lift emulsion. And I'm going to mention this again because emulsion and the lifting of emulsion seems to be something that has been a bit of a passion of mine since the very beginning. So this is a pretty early film. This is from 2003, and it's only 1 minute, so we're just going to watch it if this works. Somebody type something if you cannot hear the audio. Oops, that did not work.
Ladies, do you need something to do while your cakes are baking? Ever thought of making an experimental film? How to make a fantastic film, brought to you by Fantastic. First, you'll need some film. Whoops. Next, you'll need Fantastic, your favorite all-purpose cleaner. It doesn't just cut tough grease. You'll also need to sneak one of your husband's straight razors. Careful now. You'll be working with the emulsion of the film. Determine which side has emulsion by doing this little test. It's the sticky side. Emulsion is made from gelatin, which is made from animal parts. You'll know it from Little Billy's favorite dessert. Now spray the emulsion side with Fantastic. This loosens the picture from the plastic. Next, take that razor blade and scrape, scrape, scrape. Finally, stretch out the picture and replace it artistically on the film strip. Voila, you've just made an experimental film.
Okay, so that was an early project, and it demonstrates a fairly obscure but valid technique of lifting emulsion off of film. And there's a longer story behind that. I'm not going to get into it. It's really very. I'm really interested in making sure that techniques and all of the sort of ins and outs of working with this material practice are accessible to people. So that's one of the reasons that I made that film. And it seems like it was sort of an extension from some work that I was doing in my undergrad, where I was lifting emulsion or scratching emulsion up off of photographs. So I wasn't yet working in celluloid. This would have been 95, 96, 97, kind of in that realm. So a long, long time ago. But I moved away from that sort of thing a little bit. I started making other kinds of films. I made a series of films up in Kiwiak, which was otherwise known as Baker Lake. It's the place of my matrilineal heritage. So my grandmother came from there, and I went up there and I lived there for a year, and I made a few films. This one is one example, all around junior male. All of these are available on my Vimeo page or my website, so you can just watch them if you want to. I'm not going to go through all of them. But one of the things that's been a pretty strong through line in my work is an examination of my own personal archive. And so in that way, the work that I've done in this residency is an extension of that as well. It doesn't work. So this is another film that was made up there called Where She Stood in the First Place. And now this is a part of a series of films called Bloodline. There are 5 of them, and they all deal with kind of autotopographically or physically or metaphorically with the things that remain from the life of my great-grandmother, whose name was Kumatnak. And you might get to see a little bit of Kumatnak in one of the films later on. But she was taken from the north in 1936 by an RCMP officer who wanted her for his wife. And that's how our family kind of split. So we became one branch of the family that moved to Edmonton. And so I was born and raised in Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory, whereas all of my cousins and aunts and uncles and very, very large extended family distributed around the Kiwiak region of Nunavut, but primarily Baker Lake and Chesterfield Inlet. So Where She Stood in the First Place refers to Kumatnak, and all of the titles sort of revolve around that. This one here as well, another one called Though She Never Spoke. This is where her voice would have been. And this one, you can see that this is, or hopefully you can see that this is it's a collage of some images of some caribou incisor teeth. And so this is one of, and they're on a little wire and they came in a little leather pouch. And so this is one of the very few things that Kumatnak decided was important enough to bring down south with her, along with her two youngest children. She had 6 other children that were left in the north. It's a complicated story, but this was an examination of this object, and we'll see in another film that I made last week the rest of the garment that these would have been attached to. So these are actually decorative elements that would have been hanging from strips of sinew, decorating an amauti, which is a woman's kind of like I guess you could call it like a parka. It's like a garment that keeps the child in the sort of the back pouch component of it. And so this is what part of these things were for. And this, I think, is this. This is part of, oh, we're not gonna do this one. It's another film I made up there. This is Her Silent Life, again, referring to Kumatnak, made in 2012. This is the one that really explores the story most extensively. And I'll just play a minute or two of this. You guys can listen to my grandmother speak about what happened.
Inuit people are, they take what they take because people think that they're not anymore because they're more educated now, eh? But in those days, you just took what came to you. We're sort of ignorant of times, okay? Yeah. There's no law out there that you can't just take a woman and go. In those days, yeah. But shit, we're the only two that came down with Mom. Yeah. I think Mama said, okay, I'll go if Margaret goes, and David was only 2 years old. Nobody knew they were leaving. Nobody, not till after, according to Martha. Mama never even had a chance to say goodbye to her husband. I told you what happened. That's what Martha told me. And she used to babysit me. My dad didn't know that she'd gone. My brothers and sisters didn't know she was gone until they figured out later on, eh? Yeah. It was all done under the table because Mommy didn't know anything.
Okay, so that's just one part of that film. It's a 31-minute film, and still almost kind of makes me cry a little bit when I listen to that. Listen to my grandmother speak about that time. And then another big component of my practice has been emulsion making. And so this is a picture of a woman making and testing emulsions in the Lumiere factory in the early 1900s. And it's a really odd practice. It really kind of, I mean, it doesn't look quite like this when I do it, but there are little bottles and vials and things all over the place. It's done in a dark room. And it's a little bit of a kind of a mad science practice. I'm not going to get into a lot of it. I just wanted to show you a little bit about the emulsion lifting component of it, which is one of the things that I love about making my own handmade silver gelatin emulsions. I'm just going to skip a couple photos here pretty quickly. So this is what some of the emulsion looks like. It's got a lot of artifacting. The emulsion physically lifts up off the base a lot of the time. This is chemical or physical fogging that makes it turn black like that. But these are some of the things that I really love about handmade emulsion. And you can see that a lot of my practice actually sits in research. And so this is physical research. This is research of different materials and different ways of making emulsion. These are just some pictures of my notebooks from when I do these things, and it gets quite technical. But it's really rewarding and really exciting for me to try and to do these things. And one of the reasons that I started to do this, to make my own emulsion, was because Kodak sort of discontinued my favorite film stock, and I'm a really stubborn person, and I decided that you know, I didn't want anybody to be able to take my art form away from me, and film as a practice, as a medium, is one of the only art forms that's entirely dependent on the industry that gave birth to it. You know, you can mix your own paints. You don't have to buy paint at the store, but film is a bit trickier. You know, there are labs, there's the manufacturing of the base, of the emulsion itself, and of all the technology, the cameras, everything. So it's, so what I wanted to do was to sort of like save my own material practice. And so that's some examples of some of the stuff that I have done in the past. So here's the studio before I got here. It was nice and empty and big open space. And I have to say that one of the things, well, not one of the things, the most amazing thing about being here and having this location, this space, has been the opportunity to really spread out and to have space and to have time. And those are two things that in my normal life I don't really have very much of. So the space and time to actually dig into some work and do some research and to spread out. And so, I spread out. This is what the studio kind of looks like now. I'll show you guys that in a bit. It's all hidden behind my computer screen. And so it looks like a fair amount of chaos, I'm sure. Partly because what I needed to do was to be able to dig through all of the materials that Kiwiak saved from his life. And so these are some of the things you can see on the floor here. There are a series of photographs, some maps, and some big black binders. And I've got these big black binders here. So I'll introduce you to Kiwiak here. He created these amazing binders. Can you guys see me? You can't see me, can you? I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. Stop share, can you see me? I'm gonna guess that you can. Okay, so there's these giant binders, they're all quite heavy, where he basically saved every single thing that ever happened to him in his life. And it's this incredible archive. I think of him now kind of as an archivist. But really, he did a lot of things in his life, and he wanted to be able to share those things with the world. And so I've got 7 giant binders full of these kinds of things. And so one of the first components of this research process was to dig through all of this stuff, to pull it all out and to go through it and to find things that fit particular themes and to figure out who this guy was. And so I did know Kiwiak very well. He died in 2016, and he was one of my closest family members. I spent every weekend of my life when I was a teenager out with him. He taught me how to ride horses, and he's a really, really big part of who I am. But there's still so much that happened in his life that I had no idea about. So Kiwiak was one of the 2 children who came down on the Kiwiak in 1936, so traveled by dog team 1,000 miles, and he spent most of his life kind of fighting, is the way that it's usually phrased. He was beaten up as a kid because he was an Inuit kid and in a white world. He was living in Edmonton, and people would pick on him and pick on my grandmother, his sister, my grandmother. So he learned how to defend himself. He joined a boxing club, and he became, I think for years running, he was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. And then he had the sort of dubious distinction later on of becoming the only Inuit who was ever an Eskimo. He actually played football for the Edmonton Eskimos. And, he went around the world on football scholarships. He, by the time he was 38, I think, so younger than me, he was an alderman of the city of Edmonton. So he was an elected alderman. He did that for 2 terms. He ran for mayor. He was the very first ever Inuit lawyer, I think in the world, but I know for sure in Canada, he was the first Inuit lawyer. And he spent most of his time fighting for the rights of those people who might not have been able to speak for themselves or speak as loudly. And so what's really unique about him is that he really wasn't afraid to say what he thought at any point to anyone all the time. And so a lot of the things that I have in here are, you know, his accomplishments. He brought the Centennial Games to Edmonton, the Universiade '83, the Junior Olympics. He made a lot of things happen in his political career. He also fought the federal government for the rights of the Inuit. That was the last court case that he ever had. He was trying to establish a definition of Inuit in law and to establish what the Canadian government's responsibilities were to Inuit. And some of that was successful, but it was a big, long, 16-year-long battle that actually I just realized I'm not allowed to talk about because I signed a document. So I won't talk very much about that. He also, fought to have Inuit recognized for some of the heroic deeds that have been done. There's a couple of memorials that he had put up, and notably for this moment in time, for what I'm doing, he sued the provincial government, the Alberta government, for the right to use his singular Inuk name. So to change his name from the name that he was given by the RCMP officer when he came south, which was David Charles Ward, to change it back to his original singular name of Kiwiak. So he did this in 2000 or 2001. So quite late in his life, he was almost a senior citizen. And this was a really important battle for him. And that's what I decided to focus on for the film that I made about him, was to sort of focus on the name change and how that all went down. So let's see, what do I have next here? So you can see some of the objects and things that he saved from his life, all of the sports awards. He won so many different kinds of things. And you can see lots of tapes. He also hosted a couple of radio shows. So I have all these amazing recordings of him. It was like a live call-in talk radio show, and he was a real shit disturber. He kind of fought for the underdog, like the people who weren't represented in some way. And it didn't matter what it was, if it was parking violations or dog licenses or the rights of the Inuit or some really major battle. Once he signed on to a cause, there was kind of no stopping him. And so he was always really impressive that way. And so you can see in these binders, I guess you can't see me now. But anyway, I was working with an apprentice through the Shimka Artists Network apprenticeship system. Svava Turgeson, and Svava and I went through all of these things to sort of identify what was related to, you know, the Commonwealth Games, and what's related to the name change, and what's related to his identity. And I think that that's what I decided to sort of focus on, was his identity, because your name in Inuit culture is actually 1/3 of who you are. There's your body, and there's your soul, and there's your name. And your name typically comes from an elder or someone who's passed on, or a family member. Names don't have a specific sex to them. So a girl could be named Kiwiak or a boy. And the idea is that you embody that person. You bring that person forward into the world, and they live on through you. So it's a pretty important component of a person's identity. And so Kiwiak's ability to be able to change his name back to his original name of Kiwiak was a really important, I think maybe the most important battle that he undertook in his life. He had a million things. You can kind of see on the edge of the screen a bunch of pins and buttons and watches and things like that. And he had, this is also kind of a way of tracing his history through the world. There are hundreds of them, you'll see them. And some of them which even, like this is a jelly bean attached to a pin, and he wore this around. And the kids in my neighborhood, he lived next door to me, the kids in my neighborhood always called him Jelly Bean Man, because he always had jelly beans in his pocket. He would give them jelly beans. So he wore this jelly bean pin. So this is a decorative frontal piece of an amauti that was my great-grandmother's. This was Kumatnak's, and you can see it here is sewn onto a leather jacket. So Kiwiak wore this around. I didn't get the picture for you. You can look these up if you look them up online. The McCord Museum has a really strong collection of these kinds of works by Inuit artists, and many of them are unknown. This is, can you guys see me on camera? This is Alice. So what this would have been is kind of like the frontal piece, like the chest piece of the Amauti, and this would have been created for Kumatnak, possibly by her mother, or possibly she made it herself. But normally it would be on a young girl's Amauti, and then this is the part of the Amauti that would get sort of transplanted onto larger and larger versions of it. So this set of beadwork would have been something that that she wore for her life, and each seamstress and each Inuk woman would have had their own particular pattern. So you can kind of see, you know, maybe there would be similarities in terms of color or in terms of shapes and things, but this would have been just one that that Kumatnak designed, and there would be no others like it. And you can see also that it's been kind of repaired over the years many times. And so I was able to go back to Edmonton, to my parents' place, where I got most of this archive from, throughout this residency during the summer. And so this was one of the things I was able to get. Some of the others, oops, this is not how we do this. There's a close-up for you. And these are, it doesn't show here really, but these are tiny beads. They're round beads, and so they're trade beads. They're probably like about a size, am I getting my sizes right? Like a size 11? No, size 15, the smaller of the two. So I was also really interested in beads, and where did the beads come from? How did the beads get there? Where were they made? You know, how did she acquire them? What would have had to have been traded for them? How valuable were they? Those kinds of things. And some of those are histories that I can't really access anymore, but if anybody has any ideas for where I can get some of those, that information, I'm game to do more research on it. And when we went back, we also were able to dig through some other kind of silly things. I'll show you in a minute. But anyway, I did some animating of this beaded Amauti piece. This is just 1 minute. It has no sound. It's not finished. This is raw footage, just kind of straight out of the camera. I shot Super 16, and it's not totally color graded, so the colors might not be entirely true to themselves, but here we can watch this. Sort of maybe flashing alert. There's a little bit of rapid flashing on this. If it bothers you, close your eyes. It's just 1 minute. Yeah, the color's not quite right on this, but it's close. One of the things I found really interesting was how all of the repairs that had been done after the fact, because it's been around for over 100 years, this garment, none of them could really match the correct color. They couldn't match the whites, the blues, or the reds, or the greens, and nothing on it could really be exactly the same. And so there's this interesting sort of palimpsest of tracing of the history that the garment has gone through, and how it's been sort of cared for and loved over the years. So we also went through some of my own archive, because I did mention that I was also doing this project of all of the detritus of my own life. And so we got to try on some silly clothes. This is Alice in, well, this. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but I'll do this in case. This is a thing that I had when I was, oh, it just disappeared. a parka that my mom made for me when I was a kid. Alice trying on some of my old clothes when I was little. This is up in the attic of my parents' garage. And this is Wes, my husband, deliberately being miserable, but he's wearing some of Kiwiak's clothes. So Kiwiak would dress up and do all kinds of crazy things. And this is one of his crazy kind of like couch upholstery jackets that he had. I also was able to find some pretty great footage of Kiwiak acting. So this is I'll just do a minute of it's really bad acting, but here you can sort of meet Kiwiak in his younger days. This was shot, I think, in 1976.
Like somebody's been cooking. How's my favorite girl?
Pretty good. 2 more days till Christmas.
2 more days? Danny scored 2 goals in practice today. He's going to be a real star.
Yeah, Mom. We're playing great team hockey.
Oh, that's good. You put your hockey stick away and you can be a star outside.
Danny, cut that out.
So this was it's a short film. It's a 30-minute film made I can't remember the director's name, for the National Film Board about fire safety in Indigenous communities. And this did screen up in the north. And I have a handwritten letter from one of Kiwiak's aunties who said that she didn't recognize Kiwiak because he was an Indian. He was like, why is Kiwiak an Indian on TV? So he was actually playing, this was shot on the Enoch Reserve in Alberta. And so up north, they thought it was pretty funny that he was playing an Indian, was how they phrased it. And that other person acting with him is Tantu Cardinal. And so that's maybe one of the earliest films that she did as well. There's also a lot of media around about him because he ran for mayor, he did all kinds of things, some really great sound bites from things. So once I get into digging through the audio, there'll be some pretty interesting components. This is an interview with him, I think it was Sheila Rogers on CBC.
You're listening to Sounds Like Canada on CBC Radio 1, Sirius Satellite Radio 137 and CBC.ca. My name's Sheila Rogers. My guest in this half hour has spent much of his 71 years fighting. His name is Kiwiak, and he was a boxer at the age of 13, a lawyer at the age of 30, and not just any lawyer either. He was Canada's first Inuit lawyer. Now Kiwiak is fighting cancer and the federal government at the same time. He's suing the government of Canada for official status for Inuit people. And this has been called the most important fight of Kiwiak's life. All this from a man who was actually raised as a white boy, I say that in quotations, in Edmonton. On Monday, Kiwiak is the subject of a documentary made by the Oscar nominee Zacharias Kunuk, he of Atinarjuat, the fast runner. And I'm going to play a little scene from the documentary throughout our conversation, but I don't want to postpone saying good morning to Kiwiak in our Edmonton studio. Hello to you.
Good morning.
How are you?
Fantastic.
Good.
After you've had cancer and you're alive, everything is phenomenal.
How are you feeling about this documentary?
I hope it's not like everything else I've tried and they say, gee, nice, let's talk about it, and then don't do anything about it. My concern, the documentary is good. It's bringing the light to some people that didn't know it before, that we're not even, a identified species of human in Canada. But the big thing is a court case to get us recognized and get us the rights that are due the Inuit.
Okay, oops, I didn't mean to stop screen sharing. So you can kind of hear his voice there a little bit. Like I said, she sort of did a way better job of introducing things than I did, could have just done that. But I just held up the DVD too. It's called Kiwiak versus Canada. It's available on Isuma TV. If you're interested in watching it, it's 48 minutes. It's from 2006. So Zacharias Kunuk, who made Atinarjuat and Fast Runner and the Journals of Ned Rasmussen, he made a film about Kiwiak, kind of themed around fighting. And so one of the things, I didn't want to redo the film that's already been made about Kiwiak. But I'm going to show you just some footage. I'll skip through it because I think we're running short on time. Of some of the things that I've done. So the film is so far, the working title is called In a Name. The idea being sort of what is in a name. And eventually it will be probably paralleled with the idea of, I don't know if you guys are up on the news with this little bit, but the Edmonton Eskimos football team, the CFL football team, has finally, after 50, 60 years, decided to drop the Eskimo component of their name. And this is something that Kiwiak was called upon many times. I'm gonna just play this while speaking, actually. He was called upon many times to comment on this because he was the only Eskimo that ever played for the Eskimos. And so people would ask him, well, what do you think about this? And, you know, he had varying opinions as time went by, but I think it's kind of pertinent when you think about what a name means and how words carry meaning and what they do. And so this isn't necessarily all for that particular film. This is just raw footage. Like I said, it hasn't really been properly graded. It's pretty messy. It's just straight out of the camera. I shot on a Super 16 Bolex. And so one of the things that I needed to do, because I had this color reversal film, was I just wanted to focus on all of the things that had a lot of color in them. I have a lot of things that don't have any color in them that are just white paper documents. And so I made an effort to focus in on those kinds of things. You can see this montage of Kiwiak through the years. So there's no sound for this yet, but eventually there will be. It kind of just shows a little bit about what he's done throughout his life. The amount of material that there is on this man and the kind of archive that he's left behind, there could be 10 films made about him, but I'm trying to sort of focus in on just one component of things. See all the pins and buttons of all the places that he's been. And let me see, maybe I'll skip ahead to something. And it's just this incredible document of himself. He had quite a big ego, I'd say. This little coaster thing really sums it up for me. It says, I don't know if you can see it, it's pretty small on your screen probably. It says, when you're as great as I am, it's hard to be humble. That's one of the things that is a part of what he had. And there's a number of things that kind of function like that. And he actually underlined in red every news article of things that had to do with him. When people were upset with him, even calling him out on what was then sort of social media, which was the newspaper, he would write it down and he would underline it, even if it was the bad things. So it's this really incredible archive that he's sort of left behind. So that's some of the footage. You can see it's all pretty, it's all hand processed, color reversal and color negative. I hand processed that earlier this week with the assistance of Svava. This is Kumatna, my great-grandmother. And there's a bunch of things to do with Inuit and naming. So there's a project called Project Surname, and these, I'll just pause it here. This is an E number or an Eskimo number. I don't know if all of you are familiar with this, but there was a point in the 1950s when officials kind of decided that Inuit names were too hard to pronounce and that there were too many different spellings and it was too complicated. And so they gave everybody an E number, and they had to have this little disc and they could wear the disc. You can see them sort of hanging here, Eskimo identification number. And then there was a project, another project called Project Surname, where there was an attempt to reestablish the correct names for all of the different people. But there were a lot of problems created through that system. For example, there would be, you know, they would sort of decide that there were too many people with the last name Tuluruk. And so they would just give somebody the last name Tavalak, even though that wasn't their name. And so brothers and sisters would end up having different last names. And some people who refused to take part in this surname, because Inuit were just given one name, originally it was just one name until the government came in. So when I was living in Baker Lake, there was a guy there whose name was Jody, and that was just his name, and it had always been his name. He didn't have a second name, but because he refused to have a second name, he was called Jody. And so I think Kiwiak's kind of like along those lines. He was suing the provincial government for the right to change his name back to just Kiwiak. And so he had a lot of trouble, and it's part of what I'm documenting through these papers. I remember being at the hospital with him once. The nurse came in and asked for Mr. Ulb, And we're like, no, sorry, wrong room. They came back and they came back again. And eventually we figured out that what they had to do at the hospital was on the hospital bracelet, they had to put something in the second field. They couldn't put nothing. So they put LLB because he was a lawyer. So you used to have that following his name would be Kiwiak LLB. And so they made Lub his last name. That was a bit funny. But he had a lot of little mini battles with organizations. The Law Society, for example, they had a really hard time changing his legal name back to Kiwiak. Lots of government documents would come as Mr. Kiwiak or Kiwiak or Kiwiak period. They would use a period because they had to put something in that space. So naming has always been a kind of I don't know, like an interesting history with Inuit. And we passed through some documents here. You can kind of see Parker, formerly Kumanar. This is somebody's version of spelling Kumatna, which is, I think there's only 3 letters in there that are actually correct. And Parker was an anglicization of my great-grandfather's name, whose name was Pakarjuak, and Pakarjuak became Paka, but for the RCMP up there, it just became Parker. So there's a lot of different, and then they just attached that onto Kumatnak to make it her last name. So there's a lot of tricky components to naming. And so that's what I've been sort of focusing on. There's some pictures of the north up here. So what time have we got? Oh, wow, we're running out of time. Okay, so that's part of what I've been doing. I'm gonna switch really quickly here to this other project I was talking about for the Inuit Art Center. So animation is actually kind of where I started. I wasn't trained in animation, but it was something that I was drawn to as an artist. So I just started making them. And I would say that that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm a little bit self-conscious because I know there's some professional animators in here listening at the moment, and I apologize for all of this. But what we're looking at here is some test outs of some of the techniques that I was doing. So this little guy here is a bear. He's a little wind-up toy, and he's missing his hair. And he's one of the characters of this film that I'm making. It's quite an unusual film for me because it's very subject-based, and it's got, you know, character moving through space, and it's got a little bit of a more narrative or an experimental narrative bend to it. And so what I did, you know, I said at the beginning, or Jazz said at the beginning, that I like to make things difficult for myself, and I'll show you how deep that goes. So this little guy is a wind-up bear. He's not a traditional animation character. He doesn't move his limbs. He kind of like does this, but he doesn't really bend. And so I was animating him through a space that I created. And I shot that stop motion animation on Super 16 and hand processed it and scanned it. And then with Svava's help, I printed all of these things onto different surfaces. And so what I was doing is there's a kind of a secondary layer of animation where I'm printing these things onto, ideally, photographs, and then lifting the emulsion up off of that by chemical means, but primarily by scratching and drawing and stuff like this. So you can see in this image here, the little bear he's in a little sort of green space, and this is me testing a lot of the different materials. Now over here, down in this corner is a real photograph. So this is an emulsion-based photograph, and it scratches really beautifully. I'm going to talk a little bit about process here. When you scratch into it, the emulsion lifts just so amazingly, and it's really, really satisfying to get different kinds of techniques to it. Whereas in this top picture here, you can kind of see that it gets really dirty. The paper behind it gets dirty, and so there's a bit of trial and error for this, and I'll show you some other examples. So this up here with the 2 bears, the bear on ice, one flipped upside down. This is on, it's still a digital print, it's an inkjet print, but it's on a glossy paper. And so this is probably one of the pieces that I'm going to be working with. I have a huge stack of these things over in the corner there. I haven't literally dug into these yet. I haven't scratched into them yet, but I have I don't know, a stack of about 700 images to scratch into. And down the bottom here, the little bear in his green space, you can kind of see the environment. I'm not sure if it's quite clear, but this one is a transparency. So you can see here on the light table, there's 3 cells here, and there's a couple of them piled up together here on the light table. And so this is, so far, this is my favorite thing. This is immensely satisfying to scratch away the, it's a bit different. It's kind of more like a photocopied, like a heat sealed surface on the acetate, but it's very, very satisfying. I've always liked scratching things. It's like having scratch cards. So I'm gonna move my laptop here and show you on the wall behind me, I don't know if you can see this, a bunch of the different cells for this animation. And they're all different, and you can kind of see like these ones here, Alice helped me scratch. And some of them, I don't think Svava scratched any of these, but one of the parts about this that I like is that it's kind of collaborative. It's like, it doesn't need to be me or my hand or exactly perfectly what I need it to be. There can be sort of like a general sort of direction of how things go. And I'll just move over to here. You can see them all sort of stacked up at the table here. So this is the stack of photos that I have to get through. There's a lot of them. But it's a really, really...
Hey, Lindsay, you're still on screen share.
Oh, you can't see. Thank you.
No, thanks.
That's very helpful. You can't see it all. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time, but more quickly. Thanks, Anna. So here's the cells I was talking about. They're sort of individually scratched. Some of them Alice did with me, and it can be kind of a collaboration. So, I mean, there's a general direction of what's sort of happening in this animation, but there's a bit of leeway because there's, you know, there's in 3 minutes there's 4,000 frames. So there's a lot of work that I have to do here. And here's the table of work. You can see this one Alice did for me, and these are the ones that are on acetate. And it's really fun. If anybody wants to help me do some more of these, it's really fun. So I'm going to screen share again and show you some of the examples. I had a technical difficulty last night and I couldn't record in a professional quality the animation so far, so I have some very rough examples with an app that I created on my phone. So this is an early example on the paper version, which didn't work very well. Very, very quick. This is an early version of some of the acetate moving through space. Oops, that's not it. There it is. And this, maybe this is the one that's sort of a little bit closer to proper registration and whatnot. So that's a little bit slow, but that's that one moving. And then I'm going to switch one more time. I don't think there is one other film I want to show you. I'm not sure if this will work though. I might have to show it to you online. Maybe I can do it here. Ice Bear so far. Screen share. Bear with me. Ice Bear so far. Okay, so this is some of the other footage where you can see the bear in his environment, walking through. So you can see he doesn't really walk like, you know, he's not, he doesn't have posable limbs or anything. And I built this, partly because of this residency, I had the ability to create a space that was sort of undisturbable. I have a 7-year-old, you guys just met Alice. It's really hard to conceive of doing this kind of work, laying out this many things and setting up an animation that can't be disturbed. So this was done in a really funny way. I shot it on Super 16, just to skip it a bit. I shot it on Super 16 and I attached a web camera and used a Dragon Frame controller to shoot a digital version of it so that I could have a copy of it and use the onion skinning function of Dragon Frame. So onion skinning, for those of you who don't animate, is kind of like a tracer version of the last photo that you just took. So it shows you what your character was just doing, and you can always sort of play it through to see, well, was he turning his head this way or was he turning his head this way? And particularly in a scene like this where there's 3 or more characters and multiple things moving, it can get quite complicated. Just going to skip ahead a little bit more. This is one that Anna helped me make. Set up in my studio with a big giant water bath. It's one of the little characters checking out his reflection. And Eveline was my animator, my actor, my bear actor for this one. And here he is sort of floating on this little ice floe. So this is a film that's actually about racism. It's a bit about something that my great-grandmother Kiwiak taught me that has to do with how we welcome outsiders into our community. For Inuit, it's a pretty critical component of life in the North. You know, you don't knock on doors, you don't refuse someone entry. And so when somebody comes to your community, where's that one shot? When somebody comes to your community, you welcome them, and it almost doesn't matter, you know, what they've done or how bad they are. They're a part of the community, and that was something that was tricky for me a couple of times when I lived there. Some complicated circumstances I won't explain, but it's also something that I live my life by, and I really think about it pretty often, as how we are together, and even when there are so many things that sort of divide us. So this one will have voice actors, a series of other things. This is still there, moving through space. And I think there's this little bit at the end. You can see the grading on this hasn't been done yet. It's pretty bad. I think there's a channel on this. But I just wanted to show you a little bit of some of the footage. And so this is like not the original, but this is the video version that will get printed and become the cells, which will then get hand scratched and then reanimated digitally. I'm not that crazy. I will do it. I won't do it on film again. So this probably will be the last screen share. I am going to show you a little bit of the project that I created about my own archive. So this one is called Leavings. It has no sound yet, and it's just a different way of going through stuff. I was originally thinking about going through it as maybe one chunk of time, and it's a little bit not, it's a little bit kind of all over the place. But there's a lot more to go through. So this is just sort of like the beginning of this exploration. So it's kind of like my life on paper and all of the paper ephemera and detritus that is sort of left over from having lived the life I've lived so far. It's just 1 minute. And so one of the things that's incredibly satisfying about this is that once I've shot the thing, whatever it is, it really feels a little bit like I can stop sharing. It feels a little bit like I can actually get rid of it. So I don't have to be weighed down by all of this stuff. I'm still weighed down by all of Kiwiak's stuff. I'm gonna show you a little bit more of the studio and the state that it's in. There's this boxing gloves, and just boxing trophies and things. And there's the floor, what it looks like right now. So my animation setup over here. You can see decorated with his cowboy hat. So I'm just shooting on, it's actually a titling stand, and I'm using it with a Super 16 Bolex attached. And there's the jacket itself there that we were looking at in close up. So it's yeah, I'm still gonna have, I'm still gonna be swimming in all of this stuff from Kiwiak's archive, because it's much too important to just discard. But I really kind of feel like I can get rid of the things that I use in this way through my own archive. So there's a component of that that's really freeing and really exciting for me. So I think that's all I have to show you, and it's 2 o'clock, look at that. So I still have time. I don't know, Jazz, if that's okay, if we have some questions and things. I forgot to remind you guys to type questions in the chat.
Definitely time for questions.
Looks like there is one there. Okay, question from Facebook. Regarding the beads, it's really interesting to me the way this filming style and the present material of this film animates and activates the patterning. I've seen archival color footage of First Nations culture such as potlatch, and I'm curious to know if this kind of animation stands in opposition or something subtler, less direct, but still subverting of the presumed colonial/institutional eye of a conventional documentary approach. It's probably kind of an obvious question. Thank you. I don't know who wrote that question, but thank you for the question. I think that's a good observation. I think that I don't know if you guys have looked at this, but there's the McCord Museum is one of the most amazing collections of all of these sorts of Inuit artifacts, and there's you know, a reclaiming of Inuit artifacts, of First Nations, of Indigenous Aboriginal artifacts around the world, a repatriation, if you will, of some of those things. You know, things that were never meant to be taken from communities. You know, there's the concept of totem poles being in museums, for example. This is not my community monoculture, so I hesitate to speak about this, but I will say that I know that I've heard people talk about the need for those poles to exist and to die in place, that they're meant to fall down and be there as relics and remnants, even when they go back to the earth, that they're meant to do that there in that community for those people. They're not meant to be gawked at and looked at in a museum somewhere. And that there's benefits, and people can learn about some things like that, but it's not the intent of those things. And so in this case, it's really quite amazing that that we still have this it's the chest piece, so it would have happened right here on the Amauti, that it still exists, that it's still in the family, I think is a really amazing, wonderful thing. But very much of these things, very many of these things are anonymous. They're out there in the world, and they're looked at in a different way. There is a colonial gaze, the idea that somebody else went and decided that this thing was important, and then they took this thing, or they bought this thing, just like my family. They took this thing because they wanted this thing, and sort of collected it. And the idea of collecting it, of keeping it, of saving it, of putting it on display, those are all very, very colonial acts. And I think about it a lot when I do it, because I'm also collecting. I'm collecting the things that remain from my family that I'm interested in. But how am I doing that? And do I own these things? And do I have a right to show these things? And how am I showing them? And am I showing them in a good way? And I had a lot of questions about that when I was filming in my matrilineal community in Hnatyshyn, and showing people. Same thing for the bear animation. It comes from a traditional story that my great-grandmother told me. It's a very, very much a fictionalization of that story, of that concept, of that idea, but the root of it is, it's an Inuit value, it's an Inuit law. So how do I show that? And how do I show that in a good way? Those are all things that I'm always thinking of when I'm depicting something, when I'm showing it. And I think for what I do, because I do things in such an experimental bend, it can actually be kind of dangerous, because I'm not attaching a meaning to it. I'm not saying this is what I want you to think about this thing. I'm trying to create space so that there's a place for the viewer to engage with those things. But that can also be kind of a dangerous thing, because you also want to be sort of protective of what there is and who owns that knowledge. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some of the things I think about. Oh, wow, there's more questions. Somebody help me out here. This is from Facebook. Oh, from John Luna. I can see you. There you are, John. Do you want to ask your question so that I'm not the only one talking? Because I've been talking a while. You're muted now, but I'd love to hear from you if you care to speak.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, yeah, I know I empathize with your situation, because as a teacher, yeah, I hear a lot of my own voice. Okay, this is kind of a big question, though. It is kind of a continuity to the last one. And I'm really hoping it picks up from what you just said about the sort of sense of trepidation of going into the work without an a priori strategy sometimes, or maybe having a strategy, but not a sense of outcome. and how one becomes responsible for that kind of process in this kind of context. So something I've been thinking about in my own work is modernism is often conceived of as having this binary or oppositional tension in relationship to a source that it might make use of, like folk sources or biographical sources, or even notions of embodied, sources, as a kind of institutionalizing or colonizing gaze, as you've just described. But one thing I've been really interested in, and I'm really interested in your use of this archival kind of film stock, is as modernist tools age, modernist idioms age, they seem to become a kind of historically specific and fairly fragile vernacular. And in that sense, I almost wonder, in a way, if they kind of meld in a kind of process of decay or inclination toward formlessness with that source that previously it had had this kind of symbiotic relationship with. Clement Greenberg used to say, modernism has a parasitic relationship with authentic culture, but it's a little bit one-sided. I kind of wonder if time and distance and decay, and in terms of how we see these industrial media, help to dissolve that boundary and relieve that kind of binary tension. And in this way, in the way I think about it here, when you're describing making these films and working with this material to bring out Kiwiak and his life, it almost seems like a survival strategy, and therefore possessed of some kind of authenticity as a continuity of oral culture. I don't know if that makes sense.
That is a big question. That's a doozy. Thanks for that, John. I think you've hit on a lot of different things. And when I go into these kinds of explorations, and a lot of the time, I am going in without a specific plan in mind. And I think that changes my relationship to the material itself. So when I'm shooting, I'm also doing pre-production, and I'm also editing, and I'm also doing all of those things all at once, and all of those processes inform each other. But I do work almost, not exclusively, but a lot of the time I'm working with film, and film, as we sort of talked about earlier, is attached to this industry. And it's a very modernist medium, I guess, especially if you start looking at like experimental film and the ways in which, in relation to actual format or medium, the physical celluloid base, it sort of sits in a particular time. And even within that, every medium that has existed, we could get into sort of like the medium is the message, Marshall McLuhan and whatnot, and then look at this medium that we're using right now. Our whole lives exist through Zoom. We converse, and most of my existence now is boxes on screens. It's heads inside of boxes on screens. And that's a different knowledge system. It's a different thing than me standing physically in the same room with you, showing you this stuff and having a conversation. It's a very different means of engagement, and it isn't just a new way of formatting something. It's changing the information as well. And so I work mostly within this format that has real boundaries. It has real structures and boundaries, not only the 24 frames per second, the ability for it to pass through a projector, how I can expose it or not expose it, the ways in which film glitches and decays, and what happens when I hand process it. Would this project have been better if I shot it on digital? Probably. It would have been cleaner. The color would have been more consistent. There's all sorts of things. But for me, it comes down to the engagement with the material, like the medium. Like for my grandmother, beading was her material practice. And that's, and you can see from the garment we were looking at that she was very much an artist. But for me, film is my material practice, and it's the way in which I need to explore and to engage with things. So the process of engaging with this material, with these ideas, through something that is, I don't know how to explain it, it's really central to me, it's central to the way that I explore the world. Changes the way that I'm sort of conceiving of things, I guess. And that process of always re-editing and shooting and the pre-production, all of those things being kind of wrapped around each other all the time, to me, allows for me to create things. And I'm not saying that there's anything really amazing about any of the things I've created, but they come to a truer representation of what I what I'm doing, because it's process oriented, because this is my journey. And what I'm documenting really is my journey through these things, rather than trying to create meaning for you to get out of it and decide whether or not you like it or not. I don't know if that makes any sense. I think I only answered about 10% of your question, but that's all I got.
It's too long a question, and actually the dialogue is really rich to me, so thank you.
Yeah. I'm looking at the next question. I think there's 2 parts to yours. And then, did your uncle Kiwiak build his collection with the intention to share it with others? When building your personal collection throughout the years, was the intention always to share it as a way to retell the stories embodied by each object, or do you experience collecting more as a private act that is now being transformed into a public record? Good question. Yes, very much. He intended for his archive to be shared. In fact, here's his will. Anybody wants to see his will? And in his will, one of the things that was listed is that he wanted this archive to go to, I mean, there were specific pieces that went to specific people, but the bulk of it, all these mega binders and things, these were supposed to go to either the UBC Law School or to the University of Alberta, or the Law Society. I think there's a few places that where there was sort of like interest in having that happen. And the city of Edmonton also expressed interest in it. I'm just going to show you. This is a proclamation of March 14th, 2003 was declared Kiwiak Day in Edmonton. This is from the mayor of the city of Edmonton. So they were kind of interested in the archive as well. And, you know, there's probably going to be like a sports complex or something like that named after him in Edmonton. And there's probably going to be a home for it. But right now, its home is with me. And I really wanted to just honor him, to do justice to him, to bring some of his story and some of the really incredible things about him and what he's done in the world to light in a different way than has been done before, than he was really able to do. And he did, you know, kind of honk his own horn a lot of the time, but he can't really explore things from the outside or from like an inside outside kind of a way that I can. And so it's really overwhelming to have all of this material and to be responsible. I feel very responsible to do something with it, and to do justice to it. Justice isn't the right word, but that's the word that's in my head right now. So eventually these archives will go somewhere. They won't just rot in my basement, but I don't know what that's going to be. And I don't really know what form it needs to take either, quite exactly. But I'm still working on that. And for my own stuff, I am kind of like just a bit of a pack rat, and I keep a lot of things that I don't need, and things that are, I get this from my mom, the idea of memorabilia. And so there's all these boxes and boxes of calendars, like the family calendars, or the scribbled notes that we wrote back and forth to each other when somebody wasn't home and we had to tell them they had a phone message. All of those things still exist, including, you know, every drawing I ever did from the age of 2 onwards, as well as from my brother and sister, all of our old clothes, even all of, I've got in a corner here, somewhere over there, I've got some of Kumatnak's clothes. And Kumatnak died in 1990, but I could practically reconstruct her whole figure because I've got, you know, socks and underwear and shoes and glasses and everything. So my own archive, the stuff that I have, I kind of think of it as junk that I don't need, but one of the things that I have a really big problem with is my memory, and I don't have a very good one. So, so for me, the physical existence of these things, it's almost like proof that I was there in some way. And like it helps me to recall who I was and keeps me humble in ways that I think are really important. For Kiwiak didn't have any kids. So he didn't have, you know, somebody to carry anything forward into the world. So this is his legacy. This is something that he really wanted to share with people. If you just look at how impeccably he kept all of these notes and underlined all of these things and saved everything, it's quite a testament to who he was and some of his abilities in this world as well. So he did want it to be shared, and I did not. So one of my plans for this was to destroy all of the things that I use, that I shoot. So I shoot one sketchbook all the way through, and then I can burn it, or I can seal it inside of a giant resin cube or something so that it's never accessible again, that I can never kind of like dig into it, yet it still exists in some way. So I didn't get to that part. That was one of the things I was going to explore through this residency, but I've been quite busy, but I didn't quite get to that. So there's, let's see, what's the next question? From John again. Animation like abstraction, not a monolith, but fundamental, available, in this sense, productive opposition to what you said about film's industry dependence. I think, for instance, of the notion that animation and abstraction entered the modernist tradition around the same time historically, with both acting as strategies to circumvent hierarchically embedded academic modes. It is also, I suspect, that because of its persisting demotic qualities, animation like abstraction needs to have its imperatives renewed continuously to be relevant. For these reasons, I see no reason to qualify or apologize for use of animation. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I have always approached animation in some of the same ways that I've approached film. And I didn't actually go to film school. I did a master's in film eventually, but I taught myself how to do all the things that I do in film, which is a very expensive way to learn if you were going to decide to embark on it, like to figure out how to expose film properly, for example, or how the variable shutter works on a Bolex, which I know there's some people here that are familiar with. It's challenging to do, and I think maybe part of that nature. It's just in my nature to make things difficult for myself and to do things the hard way and to just learn by doing and learn by trying. And so, you know, it's not, it's pretty static animation. You can kind of see it's not very sophisticated stuff, but it's a really rewarding process for me. Okay, I got another question here. I'm curious about the personal impact of this by hand and time-consuming work. If you're willing to share, do you find the work to be healing? Yeah, I do. I think it's really meditative. I'm so often working on a deadline or trying to get something done or fitting it in between classes or doing all kinds of things at the same time. The opportunity to be here in the Griffin studio has been like hours of time where I can just do the things that I was kind of born to do, like to explore things and dig into things and research and to use my hands to make things. So that's been fantastic for me, and I kind of forgot how much I like doing those things. I started in the world, or in the art world, as a drawer, so drawing is my medium, really, and it's there's something about like kind of needing to do things by hand. I'm gonna see if I can find, I don't know if I can find this, but I just wanted to show you a piece that I made. I'll try and screen share this. This is a piece that I made a little bit earlier in the summer. There it is here. Actually, here's Alice. Alice and I made it together. So can you guys see that image? That's an image, yeah. So that's a drawing. It's a text-based drawing. It's called Dobby and the Rest of Us Distancing. So Alice drew all the characters. You can see she's very carefully put them 2 meters apart from each other. And some are wearing masks and some are not. And it's kind of a graphical representation of a landscape of the tundra up kind of in the north. And you can't probably read the text from where you are, but it starts off in the upper left-hand landscape. And it says, you know, today is April 16th, 2020, and there are 1,400,752 COVID cases today. And so it's an exploration, a stream of consciousness kind of thinking of me writing and speaking to myself and processing the kinds of things that are going on in the world. And right around where we get to Dobby, and we read Harry Potter at home, which is why Dobby figured so prominently in this piece, is where some of the violent racist acts began to happen in the world, George Floyd and some of the other ones. And so I'm reflecting on that. I'm reflecting on our relationship as a nation to First Nations, to Indigenous Aboriginal people, to the ways in which we're unwilling to accept stories and realities, and how we value and don't value each other. I also get pretty geeky on like how vector-based, vector-borne diseases work and all these kinds of things. So it's kind of it's an interesting record. At the end, it ends on, where did it end? It's June 5th, 2020, and there are 6,705,588 cases of COVID-19. So far, far, far fewer than we have now. But you can see even in that drawing, the interest in like, it's hard. Like it took me 6 weeks or more to do that. I wasn't doing it nonstop, but it's there's something about the time it takes and the labor involved, the love of the labor involved in the kind of work that I make that that was really important. So so I've got one more here from Robert Kardash. Thank you for sharing. Was Kiwiak named after the legendary figure in the famous oral Inuit story? So that's a good question. One of the most famous characters in Inuit oral history is a character called Kiwiak. So it's not quite the same as Kiwiak or Kiwiak, but we don't actually know. So I can tell you that Kiwiak's grandfather was named Kiwiak. At least I've heard that from some of my family members, and so I believe it. And so Kumatnak's mother was Ungangai and her father was Kiwiak. And that's, I have one photo of them. That's an amazing photo from the 1920s up near Chesterfield Inlet. But beyond that, I don't actually know. It's a pretty rare name in Inuit culture, maybe because of its association with that legendary figure. You know, in the way that if you think about Atanarjuat is also comes from a traditional story. There's multiple versions of the story, and Kiwiak's a character of whom there are many, many stories. It's kind of like a long story with multiple adventures, maybe kind of similar to the way you'd think of like a trickster or a raven or coyote and some of the other ideas. Okay, it sounds like I'm being called to task here. We have one more question. And I don't know where it is. Michelle. Oh, I already did that. Okay, I don't think I have, I think maybe, yeah, I think maybe we're running out of film, but I see there's a couple of really great comments and things in the chat. And thank you guys so much for participating in this with me and for listening to me talk for so long. I really need a glass of water. I'm exhausted, but it's been really, really wonderful to share this with you, and hopefully, I don't know, hopefully it wasn't, didn't put anybody to sleep.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for your hugely engaging and wonderful talk. We know that it's a super crazy time of year for you, so we so appreciate you taking the time to tell us about your practice and the projects you've been working on throughout your time at Griffin. And we'll look forward to seeing those projects progress as well. Also, a huge thank you to everyone who joined us here today for this virtual presentation. This talk was recorded as mentioned, so we will be archiving it and it will be available on our website. And I think without anything else to say, I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks again, Lindsay, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.